Welcome back to the illumilands. My name is Daniel Hurd, and this is the beginning of a new series I'm starting called Illumilands Responds. Basically, I'll be going over some very popular videos on YouTube dealing with God and theism, atheism, philosophy, and giving my response to the points made in those videos. To kick off this entire series, I've decided to start with a video called Top 10 Logical Reasons That Prove God Does Not Exist. This video has around 500,000 views. It was released about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, by a channel called Crunch. I personally have never heard of them until now, but they have almost 500,000 subscribers, so they're pretty big. They're pretty big, I'd say. But let's see the top 10 logical reasons that prove God does not exist.
10 logical reasons that deny God's existence. So you believe that God exists? This question is making the rounds these days. But don't be misled. This definitely is not a new generation question. It's been debated through years, and the discussion can go on for centuries. In case you deny the existence of the Almighty and somehow lack evidence to support your side, we have you covered. So we unveil 10 logical reasons that will shake some believers. Number 10. Poorly designed universe. Don't the theists say that God is perfect and the creator of the universe? Well then, why did he design the universe and his babies in such poor fashion?
It's very interesting to see the question be, why did he design the universe and his babies in such poor fashion? That's quite a contrast there between design of the universe and design of his babies.
We weren't in a hurry to land on Earth. We could have stayed in his creation lab for some more time.
I suppose. Maybe we could have.
If God exists, and it's him who has created us with diseases and malfunctions, do we have a reason to worship him?
If God exists, and it's him who has created us with disease and malfunctions, well, already you have some assumptions there that God is the one who created the diseases and the malfunctions. Now, there are certainly people who do believe that, but it's not strictly a requirement of theism that you believe that God is the creator of diseases and malfunctions. Now, granted, someone could say, well, God created everything, didn't he? So that would include whatever goes on in what he created. So maybe he didn't directly create diseases and malfunctions, but at the very least, he created the conditions in which diseases and malfunctions could arise. That's a common complaint that I hear. This is really an extremely simplified version of the problem of evil, and as such, the complications with typical problems of evil also apply here. Ultimately, I think the most rational thing for a theist to do is just to say, I don't know. Man, I don't know. That's a good question. There is this disease and malfunction. I don't know what purpose they serve. I actually find this pretty similar to somebody who asks an evolutionary biologist, so you really believe that we came from a common ancestor, one single common ancestor? Like, how could we possibly go from a single-celled organism to all the complexity and diversity we see around us? I think the most reasonable response that the biologist could give is that even though we've got some reason for thinking that particular species had particular common ancestors, we don't know exactly how we got from single-celled organisms to the diversity. We don't have the tree of life figured out, but that doesn't mean that the process didn't take place. If you've watched my episodes 5 and 6 of the Illumilands podcast, you'll know that my stance on the problem of evil is basically that if you're a theist and you're justified in your theism, then you're also justified in rejecting the problem of evil, just outright. I am using the term atheism to mean the belief that there is no God. So this is not weak atheism. I'm used to the philosophical definition, and all throughout history, atheism has meant the view that there is no God. So that is how I'm using the term. An atheist who is justified in that sense is also justified in accepting the problem of evil and accepting that evil does provide evidence against God's existence. But it really just depends on whether you're a justified atheist or a justified theist. I don't think the atheist can argue in a way that ought to convince the theist. And similarly, I don't think the theist can argue in a way that should convince the atheist. That's basically my take on the problem of evil, and that is basically my take on this first, quote-unquote, proof that God doesn't exist.
If God exists, and it's Him who has created us with diseases and malfunctions, do we have a reason to worship Him?
Do we have a reason to worship God, even if He did this? That's a different question. It's one thing to say that a loving God wouldn't create us with diseases and malfunctions. It's another thing to say that because of that, we don't have any reason to worship God. Granted, if God created us with really, really great goods that outweigh the disease and malfunctioning, that in and of itself, if the goods are good enough, could be reason to worship Him. The atheist would probably say, well, they're not good enough. The goods we experience are not good enough to outweigh that. But at that point, like I've said, the atheist is probably rational in believing that. The theist is probably rational in rejecting that. And I don't think either side can convince the other side to change their views.
Number 9. God of Gaps.
Okay. Hang on a second. I thought this was a video of arguments that prove God does not exist. God of the Gaps is typically a complaint brought up by atheists that theists have not properly proved God does exist by just pointing to gaps in our scientific knowledge. But let's see what take this guy has on it.
Hey believers over there, we agree with you, and here's how. Now that we have your attention, could you explain the idea of God of Gaps? That is your argument of His existence?
I honestly have to say, this is my first time. What in the world? This is my first time watching this video, and I honestly am flabbergasted, both by the question itself and also with the grammar with which the question is asked. Hey believers over there, we agree with you, and here's how. What? Agree with you on what? Now that we have your attention. What? Now that you have my attention, I don't know what you agree with me on. Could you explain the idea of God of Gaps? That is your argument of His existence? What? What? Sure. Let me explain the idea of God of Gaps. That is my argument of His existence. Please, let's go. Reminder, this video has 500,000 views, and this channel has 500,000 subscribers. I just want that to not go unnoted. What in the world? I was not expecting this.
You somehow prove God's existence by pointing out phenomenon that science can't explain, and hence they're facilitated by God. In ancient times, Greeks believed Poseidon to be behind earthquakes, but it's now been proved as scientific activity. Can our lack of knowledge about the universe substitute for the existence of another force? That's not very convincing, sorry. Number 8.
That's it? That's it? What? Wait, this was irrelevant. Point 9 was irrelevant. That doesn't prove God doesn't exist. That just means that it's a really, really bad idea to think that just because science can't prove something, that means God is responsible for it. That's all that means. What? This is ridiculous. All right, let's move on to number 8.
Inconsistency of religions. Just a logical question here. If a metaphysical form exists, then why do we perceive the same thing so differently?
Whoa. I was not expecting something like this. I've never heard this approach taken. If a metaphysical form exists, so like if there's some kind of fundamental form that reality takes, then why do we perceive the same thing so differently? If reality at its most fundamental is so engaged in this form, this mode of being, then how is it that I can experience this thing in this way and you can experience it in a completely different way? I guess that's the point being made, but I don't see how it relates to God yet. Let's see.
Is there any unified view of God, his form, his number, his work, or his expectations from us? If God existed, he would have been bigger, more powerful, and with effect on the universe. The reason we all have different views on him is that he does not exist. We are not perceiving a reality. Rather, we are building on something we made up. Number 7.
What? Okay. All right. Is there, so the connection he's making? Oh. Wow, that was a really complicated way to start off this whole thing. The complaint here is that if there was a God, we should have a perfectly unified view of God. Or at least there should be some fundamental agreement on what God is like, his form, his number. So polytheism versus monotheism. His work or his expectations from us. But this is phenomenal. If God existed, he would have been bigger, more powerful, and with effect on the universe. Is the argument that he would be so powerful and have such an obvious effect on the universe that we would just all recognize it? In that case, I would just challenge how he knows that. Again, it goes back to the same sort of problem with the problem of evil. And maybe if God created everything, we should have a, perfect knowledge of who God is and what he's like. Maybe. Maybe not. I mean, seriously, maybe not. And then it just says, the reason we all have different views of him is that he does not exist. That is a great statement. That's also circular because the goal is to prove that we made it up, not to just say that we made it up. We disagree on all sorts of things all the time. That doesn't mean those things about which we disagree don't exist. Number 7.
Creation of world. We all have our own definitions of God. But one widely accepted trait of the Almighty is that it is He who created the entire universe some 6,000 years ago.
Well,
that being said, it should...
Whoa! Hold on a sec. We all have our own definitions of God. Fair enough. But one widely accepted trait of the Almighty is that it is He who created the entire universe some 6,000 years ago. Maybe if you live in America now, you believe that. But if we are talking about the entirety of the world over the entirety of history, that is so wrong. The idea that the universe was created 6,000 years ago is explicitly a young Earth creationist idea. That's why people think it. If they weren't young Earth creationists, or if they weren't brought up in young Earth creationist Christianity, they would not think that God created the universe 6,000 years ago.
That being said, it should be evident that nothing on the planet is older than this time frame. But that is not the case.
Oh my gosh. He's actually doubling down on the whole 6,000 year thing.
Fossils have been found that date back to billions of years.
So yeah, we have fossils that have been dated back billions of years. That's correct.
And if God created the world only 6,000 years ago, where did those things pop up from?
Probably they lived billions of years ago.
Can't we deduce that God does not exist, or at least that the world was not created by him?
No! We can't deduce that! Not from merely what you've said. What we can deduce is that the world is probably not 6,000 years old. The world is probably billions and billions of years old. That's what we could deduce from this. Not that God doesn't exist.
Number 6. Existence of evil.
Here it is. this hopefully will be more substantive.
When believers say that there's a God, a power which is noble and good, then do they forget the existence of evil in the world? Be logical. When God loves us so dearly, then why does he allow evil to exist? If there is God, who allows wars and riots to take place and destroy his creation when by all means he can stop it? Then he is at least not worth worshipping. Number 5.
So, the problem of evil is not a problem to be laughed at, certainly. I'm not laughing at that. What I'm laughing at is the fact that his conclusion actually wasn't atheism. His conclusion was just that we shouldn't worship God.
When God loves us so dearly, then why does he allow evil to exist?
When God loves us so dearly, then why does he allow evil to exist? That's a great question. That is, and I'm not joking, that's a very good question. I've already said my take on the problem of evil. I think that basically it can be a good reason for an atheist, and it can be rationally rejected by a theist. I think the best answer is to just say, we don't know. It's like the evolutionary biologist. I don't know precisely how we got from one single-celled organism to the diversity and complexity of organisms we see today. I don't know exactly how that took place, but I got good reason for thinking that it took place. That is fundamentally why the theist can reject the problem of evil and why the atheist is rational in thinking evil poses some problem for God's existence.
Number 5. Morality needs no religion. Most people believe that in the absence of God and religion, there would be utter chaos, leading to immoral acts.
Most people believe that? Granted, some people believe that, that's for sure. But I don't know where this guy is getting this most people from. Usually people's objection is that without God, you have no foundation on which to affirm that things are good or evil. It's not that if God didn't exist, we would do all these things that we typically find immoral. Rather, the claim is that these things that we typically find immoral, given God's non-existence, would not actually be immoral. It says nothing about how people would act.
But is that really true? Looking at the behavior of a believer and an atheist, you'd see that there is little to no difference in their morality. On the other hand, there are more than a few incidents that prove that religious people commit immoral acts in the name of God. So isn't it wrong to relate God with morality?
So he makes the point of saying the believer and the atheist, they have very similar morality. But, despite religious people wanting to say that it's God that makes them act morally better, on the other hand, there are more than a few incidents to prove that religious people commit immoral acts in the name of God. That is very, very true. Very true. And it's not good. And it also doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. So, moving on.
Number 4. Religion runs in family. If we ask you about your religion, there's a 99% chance that you follow the religion of your family, because that's what you have been taught.
There's a 99% chance that you follow the religion of your family. This is very nitpicky, but I want to see that stat. Because I 100% reject that 99% of people who are religious follow the religion that they were brought up in. Certainly a lot. Certainly a lot of people. But that might be an exaggeration, 99%.
But what is your understanding of how to worship God?
What's your understanding of how to worship God? What does this have to do with God's existence? I see a lot of talk about my relationship to God, or how I might go about worshiping God. I see nothing about God's existence in general, though.
All you know is derived from your ancestors, and it has been in the generations. You did not analyze the facts to decide which religion goes with your definition of God. The mere scenario of tightly bound family religion questions the truth in it because you can analyze facts but not fables.
The mere scenario of tightly bound family religion questions the truth in it, because you can analyze facts, but not fables. You can analyze facts, but not fables. How does that disconfirm God's existence? Seriously. How does that disconfirm God's existence? This whole thing is a big non sequitur. Yes, the point that is being raised here, just like most of his points that he's raised, they've gotten at real issues. It's not like what he's saying is just totally without any substance whatsoever. The problem is, virtually none of them are actually leading to the conclusion that God does not exist. It's either that God didn't create the world 6,000 years ago, or my particular idea of God might be wrong. But most of these things have nothing to do with God's existence. And again, you can analyze facts, but not fables. That is rhetoric. That is rhetoric. I don't know how I could emphasize that more. That is rhetoric. Even thinking about it yourself for 2 seconds. You can analyze facts, but not fables. That's false. You can analyze fables all the time. People do it. People write papers on it. Some people's jobs is nothing but analyzing fables. It's rhetoric. It's rhetoric.
It can also be seen as a belief sustained by social pressure or even threats.
That it can. It can be seen that way. Now, there's still the question of whether or not that analysis is correct. But more fundamentally, what does this have to do with God's existence? If the argument is that the only reason you believe what you believe is because your parents taught you it, therefore what you believe is not true, that's the genetic fallacy. Believing that you can falsify a view by showing how the view came about. And that is a fallacy. But like I said before, this guy is bringing up a legit point. Many people just blindly, I hate to use that word, but that really is what they're doing, blindly go along with what their parents taught them. And they never really question it. They never really think to challenge anything about it. They just kind of go along with it. And in that case, yeah, probably it would be pretty profound for those people if they actually reflected on their beliefs.
The whole idea of religion seems scary now. Yikes.
Indeed. It's almost like religion is an attempt on the part of man to do something rather than inherently being related to God in any way.
Number 3. No evidence of existence. Largely saying there's not much evidence to prove the existence of God. Well, if God is there, then why is there no proof of him being there? That kind of puzzles us.
All right, so this is a very, very crude version of the argument from silence. And that is a legit argument against the existence of God. The question is, if God is there, then why is there no proof of him being there? Now, if you believe that there is some proof of him being there, then you would believe that this is a loaded question. If you accept a cosmological or moral or whatever argument, then yeah, this statement that there's no proof just will ring hollow.
Talking of the evidences that somehow prove that such a power exists can also not be trusted.
Wait, they can't be trusted? How come?
When put under examination, these evidences fail to support the argument.
Oh, so they can't be trusted because they're not trustworthy. Ah, gotcha. Again, this is only something you would agree with if you already believe the arguments fail. If you believe the arguments do not fail, this is an empty statement.
The idea of a large number of atheists circling the world is beyond us. Since God exists, why didn't he prove himself to us?
This has been asked a lot. Why are there any atheists at all if God exists? I don't know. But if you're going to say that that's an argument for God's existence, you cannot simply leave it at a question. That's not an argument. I don't remember whether it was Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity or whether it was Mike Winger. I don't remember who said it, but he makes a point of saying that questions are not arguments. And he's absolutely right. Questions are not arguments. They might help spur on an argument. They might help generate an argument, but they are not an argument in and of itself. If you want that to be an argument for atheism, you need to rephrase it as a statement. Because we don't have the proof, God does not exist. That is what would need to be defended. But just stating the question, again, is not an argument.
Number 2, common consent. One of the major reasons for believing in the existence of the supreme power is that most people believe it.
This is insane. How does this video have so many views? 10 logical reasons. It's as though the word logic was just taken, chewed up, and spat out. One of the major reasons for believing in the existence of the supreme power is that most people believe it. Where do I even begin with this? This is a video on arguments against the existence of God. This is not an argument against the existence of God. This is an argument for the existence of God. You are just saying that it's not a good argument. And in fact, you're right. It's not a good argument, because the majority of people believing something does not mean the thing is true or even probably true.
Is it even logical to say that since a phenomenon is accredited by the majority, it must be true? We doubt that.
Yeah, okay, this guy, he gets the point. The majority doesn't mean that something is true. But that mere fact is not an argument for atheism.
Let's compare it to slavery. That was believed to be acceptable back in the day, but with time, it was found to be a faulty practice.
A faulty practice? That makes slavery sound like it was abandoned because it just wasn't very economical. Like, it had nothing to do with the morality of owning other people. But no, it wasn't very, it's not good for business. We had to get rid of slavery because it wasn't good for business. Obviously, I'm just poking fun here.
Same is the case with God's presence that is believed by many. But is that proof in itself?
Again, I have to comment on the grammar. Same is the case with God's presence that is believed by many, but is that proof in itself? Right. Gotcha. He is absolutely right that the case with God's presence that is believed by many is not in fact proof in itself.
Number 1, no growth in religion. When we look at the world around us, we realize that a decade ago, there had been so many things that we had no knowledge about, but are now a part of our life. That's how we have evolved, and our knowledge about science. But can we apply the same thing to God?
Honestly, a very interesting question. Can we apply that same sort of evolutionary thinking to God? That maybe our notions of God could improve over time, just as our notions about science have evolved over time. That's not a bad question.
We guess not, because we're still stuck with beliefs and facts that have been in circulation for centuries.
So at this point, the argument seems to be that if he did exist, our knowledge about him would be similar to our knowledge about science, and the progression of scientific knowledge should be similar to the progression of God knowledge, I guess. But we're stuck with beliefs and facts that have been in circulation for centuries. What does the age of a belief have anything to do with anything? I just don't see it. Mathematical facts have been in circulation for centuries.
Our knowledge about the God and religion has not improved, which is rather thought-provoking.
Our knowledge about the God and religion has not improved. Really? It has not improved. I wonder how this person can make that claim.
If God exists, then why is it that we are still vague about what he's like?
Wait, okay, now that's a different question. Actually, that's the question you asked like a couple questions ago. That was the whole, if there's a metaphysical form to reality, then we should all have agreement about that metaphysical form. That was that. You've already made this point.
Thanks for watching.
So, 10 logical arguments that God does not exist. Roughly 500,000 views. Channel has roughly 500,000 subscribers. Now, you might be wondering, With a video containing such little substance, what is the point of responding to it? The reason to respond to stuff like this is that it's popular, it's often culturally influential. So even if it's not very substantive in what it says, it might still make points that resonate with people. And oftentimes just a point resonating with a person is enough to convince them of whatever the person is saying. So me going in there and saying, yes, this guy raises good points, but that doesn't mean they're arguments against God's existence. I'm basically trying to safeguard against people accepting that, oh yeah, God must not exist because of what this guy says, because the point this guy makes resonates with them. A lot of the points the guy makes resonates with me too. I just recognize that those points do not lead to the conclusion that God does not exist. That is the main reason for responding to them. Now, don't think I have gone easy on the theist, because even though this video was one about arguments against God's existence, the next video in the series is one titled Scientific Proof That God Exists. And oh boy, I am excited to go over that one. So that is going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you really like the channel and want to see the channel go on and you want to support what I do, you can head over to my Patreon, link in the description. I've got 3 different tiers of support. There's a general support for those who just want to support the channel. It's very low cost. Then I've got a middle tier where you can get a Kalam cosmological argument debate map that I have actually made. And in the highest tier, you will also gain access to my personal website where I've written a bunch of different papers on philosophical and religious topics. So, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.